Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. New details on the city's handling of two heated cases. First, the botched police raid of Anjanette Young and the botched implosion of the Hilco smokestack in Little Village. The city's Inspector General's office released its quarterly report today, which included investigations into both. In the case of Anjanette Young, the IG faulted Mayor Lori Lightfoot for, quote, a troubling series of unfounded statements regarding the case and concluded that city government worked to prevent Young from obtaining video proof of the unlawful raid on her home. Separately, the IG found that city officials were warned that the dust from the Hilco smokestack demolition could be, quote, cataclysmic, and that the mayor refused to fire or discipline anyone at the city in charge of overseeing that incident that spread a cloud of dust into nearby Little Village. And you can read much more about these stories on our website. Around 200 Chicago public school students staged a walkout of class today to protest what they see as the lack of COVID safety measures for in-person learning. A group called the Chicago Public Schools Radical Youth Alliance picketed outside CPS headquarters in the Loop, saying they believe CPS leaders aren't paying attention to them when it comes to establishing the best safety and health measures in school buildings as this Omicron wave surges. The students called for more N95 masks, antigen tests, and tighter metrics to determine shutting a school down and sending kids home.
The way that things have been handled have been abysmal. 40% for us to switch online is not acceptable. 40% of my school is 250 students. 200 students, they have COVID, and that is way too many.
A new candidate is set to join the Republican primary field in the race for Illinois governor. WTTW News first reported last evening that Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin is set to announce his candidacy on Monday, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Irvin is expected to be part of a Republican slate that would include downstate lawmaker Avery Bourne as lieutenant governor candidate. Sources have confirmed to WTTW that the state's wealthiest resident, hedge fund chairman Ken Griffin, could potentially bankroll the slate to the tune of tens of millions of dollars or more, although a source close to Griffin tells WTTW that he has not yet decided on which candidates to back in these races. Irvin would join a Republican field that includes downstate State Senator Darren Bailey, businessman Gary Rabine, lawyer Paul Schimpf, and venture capitalist Jesse Sullivan for the chance to take on Democratic nominee incumbent Governor J.B. Pritzker. Jason Van Dyke is set to be released from prison next month. The former police officer found guilty of second-degree murder for killing Laquan McDonald will reportedly be let out of prison early February after serving 3 years of a nearly 7-year sentence. The Illinois Prisoner Review Board granted Van Dyke's early release. Community and faith leaders are calling for help solving the murder of a 14-year-old on the city's west side. Javian Ivey was shot and killed on Wednesday near the 2200 block of West Adams. He was one of two 14-year-olds killed on that day.
This is not normal. It is not acceptable. And every time a body drops, we need to have a community response to it and not business as usual.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Craig Dellamore of WBBM News Radio, Sarah Karp of WBEZ, Kevin Fishbane of The Athletic, and Marianne Ahern of NBC 5 News. Let's get right to it. CPS students returned to class Wednesday after the teachers union in the city struck a deal on a COVID safety plan, but union members only narrowly ratified that deal. CTU Vice President Stacey Davis Gates sounded off.
We have had these nonstop back and forth fights with the mayor of this city over common sense, practical, baseline safety measures. Our members literally took a 4-day hit to their paychecks to get face coverings for themselves and their students. That's pathetic.
Sarah Karp, despite the back and forth here, CTU leadership backed off some of their demands. How did this deal come together on Monday?
Well, you know, last week on Saturday, the CTU laid out like this big proposal that included at that point a district-wide metric for when the entire district would shut down and go remote. It also included a provision that said that kids would have to opt out of COVID testing as opposed to opt in. And that was something, those are two things that Mayor Lori Lightfoot had said, I am never, ever going to go for. Now, I don't know, but I sort of suspect that the strategy from the union was to sort of make it clear to their membership that, you know, we are pushing for these things, but the mayor's never going to go for this. And then by Monday, they had kind of capitulated and said, you see, the mayor's never going to go for these things. And I think they had to make a calculation. Could you keep teachers out till the 18th or even longer and try and push for these things? Because obviously the mayor was going to wait. She was not going to, you know, give up easily. Yeah.
And to that effect, Marianne, the rank and file of the union voted to ratify it. 55 in favor, 46 opposed. That's a very narrow margin as those votes go. Does that signal that there's some dissension in the ranks here with the union?
Well, that does give you some pause, and there is an election for those union leaders in May, and I understand that Jesse Sharkey and Stacey Davis Gates will run again as a team, and there will likely be opposition to them. But I also think what played a role in some of this is teachers were starting very small, but it was up to about 15–16% were starting to come back to the classroom, and we've never seen that in a work stoppage. Those higher percentages, I don't believe before.
Right. Actually, it's usually like 4 or 5% do cross the line, so this is much higher. But, you know, there's two ways that you could look at this. You could look at it as this is a comment on the union leadership, but much more out there, what I saw is that teachers were like, we want to wait more. We don't think that we got enough in this deal, and that this was a vote to say we don't feel safe in schools, and we don't care what the union leadership says. I mean, you know, that's sort of an indictment, maybe both on the union leadership, but also on how they feel the conditions are in the schools.
And as a result, Craig Delamore, how tenuous is this labor peace now that has kids and teachers back in school?
I'm not sure I would call it labor peace at this point.
Right.
We are still in a stage where the union and the administration will not talk to each other. And let's face it, they kind of retreated to completely separate corners. When Mayor Lightfoot had the demand to go to remote learning, she shut the schools down entirely. That was really a statement of strength, saying, no, we're not giving in to you, even if it means that we're going to keep our kids out of school. Remember, this is the mayor who said keeping kids out of school is the worst thing that could happen to them. So this is an escalation, if anything, of the tensions.
Also playing into all of this, come on, let's face it, the mayor's election is 13 months away. And that's really what this was also about.
And I mean, look, Stacey Davis Gates, that night that they accepted the deal, she said, this mayor is unfit to serve.
Well, she used the word, she said she was on a kamikaze mission, and there's rumors that Stacey Davis Gates could indeed run for mayor herself. Kevin Fishbane, so much of this kind of stuff is about who wins the narrative. Did anyone win this narrative here, CPS or CTU?
I don't think so. I mean, it's so easy to, you know, the fact that it's amazing to watch the divide in the city on these sides, and it's not on political lines either. And that's been the amazing thing about it. The kids lost, right? The kids who weren't in school are the ones who really lost. But certainly, I don't think anybody's really cheering for the union right now or cheering for Mayor Lightfoot and what the city and CPS did either.
Certainly, anecdotally, we saw parents angry all across the board. Marianne Ahern, speaking of public narrative, the mayor decided to do a lot of national cable TV appearances during this lockout, or whatever you want to call it. What's behind that strategy?
Well, and if you might recall, we used to be able to talk often, and perhaps you have, but I haven't spoken to her in maybe 10 months. I think and it's not that the national and the cable don't ask good questions, because they definitely do. It is, but they're also not here on a daily basis. They don't know all the nuances. And so she thinks, I mean, according to her people, is that there's a big audience out there. And yet others have pointed out the local TV audience in Chicago is really larger than that cable audience is.
Representing a local TV station, we're glad for that. Sarah Karp, then all this happens on Tuesday. The mayor announces she has COVID. This is right after the evening where she gives a press conference in person. What do we know about when she might have contracted this and who might have been exposed?
Well, the very first question that I had is Pedro Martinez, the head of the school system, had been spending a lot of time with her, and he wound up saying that he did test negative on a rapid test. He was waiting for a PCR, but he had to cancel school visits, which I'm sure that what he wanted to do on Wednesday morning was be in schools, opening the doors, welcoming kids back, but he wasn't able to do that because, he wants to make sure that he's not positive, especially given the fact that most kids are not vaccinated in Chicago public schools, even though all kids are mostly eligible except for preschoolers.
And part of this deal is to ramp up to testing and ramp up the vaccination eventually. Craig Delamore, speaking of COVID, are public officials confident that perhaps Omicron has started to plateau?
The numbers are suggesting that it might. However, no public official is going to say that they are sure of anything right now because of how unpredictable this has been. And really, there are too many variables. We are seeing the numbers going down, but remember, Omicron spreads so quickly. It may be a milder form, but it spreads so quickly that more people are being infected. And even if they're milder infections, if even a tiny percent of them get a serious COVID infection, the sheer numbers of how many people were infected still puts more people in the hospital, which means we still have hospitals that are seeing their ICUs filling up, even now, even with a milder form of the disease.
And among this, Marianne, there's an increased spotlight on so-called COVID scams. There's this Center for COVID Control. They operate a number of sites throughout Chicagoland and the nation. They shut down after lots of investigations. Is this just a total sham of an operation or some company that doesn't know what it's doing?
I don't think it's quite a sham. I have been tested at one of their facilities. I know others that have, although I understand that there's been some social media posting of a partner of one of those in charge saying, just bought some new luxury car thanks to COVID, or some inference like that, which certainly suggests they are not running their company well, if that's the kind of thing that they're going to promote. But I do think we might see more of that. Everyone in a hurry, people wanting to capitalize on it's that whole supply and demand.
And we should mention this week, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul warned people looking for a COVID test to make sure they're going to a reputable testing site. This comes amid all these consumer complaints that we talked about over the pop-up testing sites that have sprung up, I can talk, all across the region.
There are going to be pop-up sites that may, in fact, use a legitimate laboratory and a legitimate test to get results. But it's important to ask who they're using as their laboratory, and to make sure that that laboratory is certified.
All right, I want to move on to some other city business. Kevin Fishbane, we're going to talk about the Bears in just a bit, but Chairman George McCaskey, in this amazing press conference that he gave on Monday, did talk a little bit more about that deal for land in Arlington Heights. They're just exploring right now. It's a long way off, but do you think ultimately the team's going to have the resources to build a big modern stadium there?
Yeah, Paris, they're certainly going in that direction, and Ted Phillips targeted 2023 as when they'll kind of be able to maybe start moving in that direction, or they'll have all the resources. But, that's where the NFL is able to step in. Wouldn't it be nice if all of us could get a nice big grant from the NFL of millions and millions of dollars to build whatever? And that's what happens. If a team wants to build a new stadium, they can get some help from the league. Certainly the Bears aren't going to be having any trouble finding money of their own once it comes to that point. So I think it's now just getting through all the legalese and everything that they need to do to get to that point where they could start moving in that direction.
And McCaskey intimated that he had spoken with city officials in the past 3-4 weeks. Do you think there's any chance that the city can retain them either in Soldier Field or another property?
I don't see it happening. Those two sides just do not see eye to eye on what they both want. It was interesting to see this week to see George McCaskey and Mayor Lightfoot both, in the crosshairs of fans, of people and citizens of Chicago. And the two of them don't get along very well based on their public comments by each other. So, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Certainly, it's always been a contentious relationship between a Chicago mayor and the Chicago Bears. All right, let's talk about the governor's race. We reported last night that Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin is expected to enter the race on Monday, MLK Day, running as a Republican. Likely the ticket, Marianne, that billionaire Ken Griffin is going to back to the tune of possibly $100 million or more, although Griffin says he has not made up his mind yet. Do we really believe that, or is he Griffin's guy?
He is Griffin's guy. There's no doubt about it. You can talk to any 10 strategists out there. We're all just waiting for the official announcement to happen on Monday. It kind of started leaking out in early December. Actually, maybe even before that, in the fall, there was talk of Irvin, and then he said no. But if perhaps he would be a winner, he would be the first Black governor of Illinois. There's going to be questions about his primary voting record, sometimes as a Democrat, sometimes as a Republican. But here's where you can see that Governor Pritzker is taking it seriously. Just tonight, moments before we started, we learned that Governor Pritzker has put 90 million more into his campaign tonight. And his spokesman texting me as we've been on the air to say, I realize you're going to be on WTTW. The governor knows the fight for reproductive freedoms, a strong fiscal future, public health, and an economy. And so they've already got their answer to why they are putting so much money in this race. That tells me they think this is going to be competitive.
That's a lot of zeros and breaking news right here on the Week in Review. We thank you for that, Marianne. Craig Dellamore, I mean, this is going to be part of ostensibly a ticket that includes a lieutenant governor candidate, Avery Bourne from downstate, a candidate for comptroller, attorney general, treasurer. How unusual is it to have a statewide slate like this?
I don't think it's unusual for there to be a statewide slate. What is unusual is for it to have this kind of cohesive organization. And mainly, it's the resources. If it's going to have Ken Griffin's money behind it, that is probably the most serious move that they can make right now. But also, I think what's interesting about this is that they're going for the history part of this, as opposed to simply putting up their ideological candidates and hoping that does it. Now they want to be able to say, you can vote for the first African-American governor of the state of Illinois. They can have a history peg to this.
No doubt that's why they're announcing it on MLK Day. Not a coincidence there, Craig. Sarah Karp, if you look at Irvin's positions, I mean, he's pulled Democratic ballots in recent primaries. Aurora's been a sanctuary city. He's praised Dr. Ngozi Ezike for COVID mitigations. Doesn't this kind of run counter to the way the base of the Republican Party feels?
Yes, and I think that that's going to have to be what Pittsburgh's going to have to hone in on. I mean, he's going to have to try to tie Irvin to a Rauner and try and remind us what Rauner did. And if Griffin backed Rauner, obviously, and they were great pals, and so he's got to make people understand that just because he's a different person doesn't mean that his friends are the same as Rauner's friends. And so that's going to be a very interesting race to watch. And I think we're going to see more commercials than, it's basically going to be no TV, just commercials, one after the other.
And Richard Irvin is a really dynamic speaker. He has been honing that skill through this pandemic and through even some, bumps in the road that he's had to endure. But he comes at it straight at you and doesn't shy away from taking the stage.
Certainly could be the most expensive governor's race in Illinois history. After the last one was Marianne, the mud's already slinging. There was an interesting Tribune story today by Rick Pearson talking about one of the candidates, Darren Bailey, who's decried big government, decried so-called socialism. He and his family received $500,000 in PPP loans from the federal government and dumped $150,000 into his campaign. So how contentious is this primary alone going to be?
It is definitely going to be. I mean, it does smack of being somewhat hypocritical, saying, wait a second, why are there all these giveaways? Then all of a sudden he has his money. I want to find out even if that's, obviously there's ethical questions. Are there legal questions as well? No, this is a fight. The Republican Party's future, the chance to perhaps come back after what happened with Rauner, just one term. And, you know, and you can already see with Pritzker running his own ads, and he has even no opponent in the primary, that he's trying to get his narrative out there very soon.
All right, and Craig, we also have the Secretary of State's race where the former failed candidate for Senate, Alexi Giannoulias, has basically just swept up the endorsements here. What has he done behind the scenes to get all this support?
I think Alexi Giannoulias has been building toward this for the last several years. He's been basically building support within the Democratic Party regulars. He has become as regular a Democratic Party regular as you can get. That so-called loyalty pledge that the Cook County Democrats were demanding of candidates was a part of that whoever gets the nod, they want to make sure that the field is cleared, which is why one of those candidates, Alderwoman Pat Dowell, has left the race. She signed that pledge. And once he got the slating from the Cook County Democrats, she turned her campaign into a congressional campaign for Bobby Rush's seat.
Right, and Bobby Rush has endorsed someone else. Go ahead, Marianne.
I do think that pledge was also a bit of a tweak to Giannoulias, because he had said, praised Tom Cross as a Republican when he ran against Frerichs, and they haven't forgotten that. And so there was a little bit of a back and forth on that of, you know, we still remember, you know, you think you've moved on, we're still thinking about that.
There will be a lot to watch there, all right. A lot to watch with the Bears. After a dismal season, they fired head coach Matt Nagy and GM Ryan Pace, and at his yearly postseason press conference, Chairman George McCaskey took a defensive tone.
We get that a lot of Bears fans are unhappy, and we're unhappy too, and we're frustrated, and we understand that there's not really a whole lot that can be said today that is going to make people feel better about the situation. And it may even be that once the candidates are introduced, there will be people who say, oh, you picked the wrong guy, or you didn't get it right, or whatever. The only opportunity to produce results is on the field, and that won't be for some time to come.
Kevin Fishbane, this has become a 4 to 5 year ritual now, cleaning house with the old guard, hiring a consultant to try and find a new guard. Should Bears fans be confident that somehow Chairman George McCaskey, President Ted Phillips are going to get it right this time, or something's going to be different about this search?
I mean, they have no reason to be confident, considering this is the 5th time they've had to do this with the head coach, 3rd time with the general manager under George McCaskey. What is different is Bill Polian is in the room. He's a Hall of Fame former general manager who's won Super Bowls, won a Super Bowl against the Bears when he was with the Colts. They have 2 members of the organization, Tanisha Wade, who's the senior VP of DEI, as well as Lamar Campbell, who works with the players in there. So it's going to be a different interview process. And George McCaskey has really been a vocal member of the league's diversity committee. So I think he's very focused on having a broad pool of candidates. But in terms of them actually making the decision, it's going to be George's decision. And he's given no reason to feel that he's going to make the right one.
And he keeps saying, I'm a fan first and foremost. I'm not a football evaluator. But if you've been involved in your family's business for 30 years, you've been the chairman for the last, 10 or 11, shouldn't you maybe have made yourself an expert to be able to at least identify the right people, a la when Ricketts hired Theo Epstein?
Wouldn't that be nice, Paris? I mean, you know, he worked in the ticket office. That's what, you know, what he did. And since he's become chairman, he just doesn't necessarily either maybe not want to be that person for this team and hasn't been able to hire somebody. And, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for the next GM to have a president label on his title to make him equal to Ted Phillips and to really make sure that person oversees all football operations. But, yeah, when McCaskey says that he's not going to be kind of, doesn't get into coaching decisions and he's a fan first, not a football evaluator, you don't feel good about that. He's been the chairman since 2011. So he's had plenty of time to kind of find different ways to feel comfortable in that spot.
And they've cycled a lot of people now in interviews for general manager, head coach. Are there any names that you're hearing that are really wowing McCaskey and team there?
Well, not sure yet. The one name that's interesting is Jeff Ireland, who was a ball boy for the Bears in the 80s when his grandfather was a scout. He's been a GM before. I don't know if they want to go the young first-time GM route like they did with Ryan Pace. So that's noteworthy. And then similarly, do they want another first-time head coach like they have with Matt Nagy? Maybe they prefer someone who's done it before.
And it really seems like, when I look at this, I mean, I'm just a fan too, just like George McCaskey, but it always comes down to one name for me, someone that could turn something around really quickly, and that's Jim Harbaugh. But it doesn't seem like they want to lure him away from Michigan. Is he part of this equation at all?
There haven't been any reports of that, Paris, and Harbaugh did just sign, he hired a new coach, assistant coach at Michigan yesterday, and he's on recruiting, he's doing his thing. It seems like he's staying at Michigan. It would need a lot of financial resources from the Bears, which George McCaskey said is not an impediment to get Jim Harbaugh here, considering what Michigan pays him, and you would have to kind of be comfortable with him taking over, but he is kind of that guy who's had success in the NFL, has the Bears connection, has the quarterback connection, kind of all you think you would want. But so far, it doesn't seem like he's going to be necessarily involved in this.
All right, and Kevin, you just wrote an article in The Athletic talking about the big picture over the last 10, 15 years or so. I urge everyone to read that very interesting article. And we're out of time here, so our thanks to Craig Delamore, Sarah Karp, Kevin Fishbane, and Marianne Ahern. And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford